Welcome back to Trail and Ultra Running Training. Today on the podcast, I have Celia, and she is an athlete I have been coaching for a little while and just completed a 200 miler. Celia, how about you introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Celia Eicheldinger, and I have been running for a very long time, since I was 13. But I started ultra running about 5 years ago, and yeah, it's been a fun ride, and I'm excited to talk about 200 milers.
Yeah, that's fair. How did you been running since you were 13? That is a while. That is earlier than many of us get into this sport. Um, how did you get into it? What brought that to come?
Well, so I decided I was going to run track in high school. And everybody who runs track in high school starts off with the 100 meter because that's what we all do.
Fair.
And I just noticed that I was always coming in last. That was no fun. And nobody was willing to run the longer distances. So I thought, oh. And so I signed up for the mile one track meet and I won because I was the only one that did it. And I thought, well, this is amazing. And it just kind of started from there. And after that, I decided I want to run cross country, which is much further than a mile. So I had to get ready for that. So I spent the whole summer getting ready to run cross country. And I lived in this on this dirt road, and it was a mile uphill, like a half a mile uphill to get out of the dirt road, and then you could get onto roads and up and down a little bit.
Sure.
And it took me all summer just to run up that hill. But that's what I worked on all summer, and then I came back and ran cross country, and it just made me happy, and I just kind of never stopped from there.
I love that. So how where did you go from there? Like, did you run in college? Did you just kind of take up some consistency? Like, how did that
Yeah,
progress?
I didn't run for a college. I ran through college, but I didn't run. As I wasn't good enough, just to be completely honest.
Sure.
But I started. I had some friends to show me some trails, so I started trail running in college, and I ran my first. I think it was 15 mile. I did my first 15-mile trail run in college. And then I decided I needed to run a marathon. So I think it was either 18 or 19. I decided I had to run my first marathon. So I ran, but just not competitively.
Got it.
That first marathon was quite an experience.
How so? I feel like that tends to be the general story for most people that the first marathon is quite an experience. But
Well,
yeah, what
it
happened
was,
to you?
I mean, I'll just be completely honest. It was before anything. So I trained on water alone, never took a single gel. I didn't even know what a gel was. And like the women can appreciate this. It was before sports bras. So I had to literally wear two bras, which created all kinds of chafing.
Sure.
And it just so happened my boyfriend at the time, his dad was the cross country coach for Radford University, which was like one of the smaller universities. So I had a really good role model and a lot of help with him. But he was also just a runner. And so I would finish my long runs, like bloody nipples and all, and he'd be like, so I mean, it was just like pure on indoctrination into the world of running.
Uh,
It was fabulous.
I feel like that's just kind of how things are. Like, there's almost a badge of honor occasionally where it's like
Yeah.
bloody nipples or something. I remember hearing Carol Goucher's book. There's a lot of things that stick out about that book, obviously, but there's one where I think she finished as either a half marathon or a marathon on the world stage and completely shit her pants while running. And one of the like one of her mentors in the sport comes up to her and is like, "Congrats, you're like a real runner now," or something like that. It's just like shit's wild, man. I don't know.
Yeah,
We do weird things for this sport.
definitely. Definitely. Um,
So how'd you get into the ultra running space?
so I did, I want to say 4 marathons before I got married. And then I got married, and all of a sudden there was no time. There were kids and responsibilities, and
Sure.
just I didn't have time. So I dialed back to half marathons. And then going through divorce, I kind of just jokingly say this, like it was drink or run. And so I just started running. And I mean, I remember when my ex, when we split up our time, and I said, I just want Sunday. Just, I don't care. just give me Sundays to myself and I will watch the kids all the rest of the time. I don't care. So all of a sudden I had Sunday available. And I mean, what else are you going to do but long run? I mean, that's what Sundays are for. I think the next day I signed up for a 50K. I'm like, I'm going to do this. And it just happened from there.
Love that. Which 50K did you sign up for?
Thrill in the Hills. It's local. It's very runnable.
Hmm.
I jokingly say I ran it like a marathon and almost killed myself because I just didn't really understand the concept of ultra running. So yeah, it was a definite. When I finished, I laid down and said, "I am never, ever doing this again." That was horrible.
How long did that last? Three
Three
weeks?
days later, I
3
signed up
days.
for my first 50 miler.
Uh, nice.
Yeah, it was
So,
addicted quickly.
how did you like what took you from 50K to 100 to you obviously just finished a 200 in a fairly impressive time. Like what did that trajectory look like?
Over COVID, a good friend of mine, Meg Landymore, she and I decided that, well, she was training me for 100. She jokingly said, "Well, you're ready for 100 if you want." And I was like, "No, no, I'm gonna do the 50." But it planted a seed, and I was thinking about it. But then COVID happened, and I wasn't comfortable with racing. So she and I went on an adventure. It was so fun. We ran the Smoky Mountain section of the AT. Some people like to call it SCAR. And afterwards, I just really fell in love with adventuring and being on trail for like a really long period of time. Not so much racing, just being on trail and doing it for a ridiculous amount of time. And we were going through COVID and uncomfortable with races, and she was looking for an adventure. And so we decided that we were going to ultra running style run the Appalachian Trail. Now, we quickly learned that that would kill us if we actually did what that meant. But from there, the Smoky Mountain section was 74 miles. So that was my
Okay.
first overnight. And to this day, it was like one of the best nights of my life. She doesn't describe it that way because, well, it's another story. But for me, it was one of the best nights of my life. And then we moved to multi day segments where we were averaging between 40 and 45 miles a day, 3 to 5 days a shot, once a month. And it was an exhausting year, but it was a thrilling year. I mean, you can imagine knowing ahead of time that every month you have this amazing adventure and you're going to be on a new section of trail in a new state that maybe you've been to or maybe you haven't. Like it was the first time I'd been to Maine once we got up
Sure.
that way. So it was just it was pretty incredible, definitely.
Yeah.
And then
How did you delineate that project? Like, how much research went into that if somebody wants to do something like this? Like, how did you make all of that
yeah,
happen? Because I
we
mean, obviously it's a bunch of travel. You're in Georgia for whatever, right? So like how did you make all of that work with both the schedule and logistics and all that kind of stuff?
we work together and we're both planners and we're both stubborn and we like we move forward with things. It's not something that's going to work if you're the kind of person that waits for something to happen. We would literally be on our last day of a given segment planning our next segment. We would get home and we would say, we're going to give each other 24 hours to recover before we talk about this. But like 20 hours would pass and we'd be passing each other texts like, what do you think about this hostel? Do you think this would be a good place to stay? So we were just really on top of it. There are a lot of resources. It's now called, oh, it was Gut Hook. They've changed the name of it. I'm trying to remember what it's called right now, but it'll come to me. But far out, far out. It's an app on your phone. It has the entire AT. It has the elevation, what your climbs are going to look like, where the water stops are, where the hostels are, where the road crossings are. So we use that as our primary
That's awesome.
logistics gatherer. And we just mapped out almost every single mile. And I mean, it was our hobby. That's what we did.
How long did you do that?
She and I were together on the AT for a year and a half. I think it was 14 times that we went out. The last segment, she finished the AT and I did not because it was just too hard for me. It was a 460 mile segment that we were planning. I just, my body wasn't ready for it. I got 200 miles in and I had to stop, and I just continued on and crewed her to the remaining. We had Warren Doyle crewing us. And so I joined him in his van and helped her finish. My friend Meg is a very experienced ultra runner. She's
Yeah,
quite incredible. So it was a stretch for me. I,
yeah, that's
um,
fair.
I definitely found my limit. We ultra run because we want to find that limit. And so there's positives to that. It's nice to see that, okay, this is it. Maybe I can push past it. And that's part of been the allure of the 200-mile race to me. Along the AT, it was always one of my goals to hit 200 miles in 4 days. And I never made it on the AT. We did 200 miles in 5 days, almost 195 miles. We did a lot of 180 mile and 150-mile sections, but I never hit that goal. And so that was kind of a big driving force, at least for my first 200, which
Sure.
um, was almost a year and a half ago. And then again for this 200, just always in the back of my mind, like, how can I be faster than like 96 hours? Because for whatever reason, that's a thing. I don't know
Yeah,
why.
it's fair. Did you ever go back and finish the AT?
I have gone back. I went back last year and put in 100 miles, and I have 150 more miles to do this year. And I do
Sweet.
plan to finish that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So with that draw for 200, like, which was the first one you did? And you've done two now. Yeah, I'm not missing any. Great.
Yes.
So, which was the first one you did and how did that go?
I did Fierce Dragon 200, and it's a 200 miler that's in North Georgia. It goes out of Vogel, and it's on the Duncan Ridge Trail, which is, some people in Georgia think it's probably the hardest trail in Georgia. I don't know if that's true or not.
Hmm.
I don't find it to be super technical. It's not super rocky or rooty, but it's very steep. It'll get you close to somewhere between 300 and 350 feet of gain per mile. So it's my 200 miler, I think we estimated at like 65,000 feet of climb.
Jesus, that's wild.
And to
That's a
be fair,
lot.
it was the race directors, he calls it a 200 miler, but my watch clocked 215 miles.
Sure. Yeah.
But that's part of the fun. He didn't charge me for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's part of the craziness for sure. Um,
Yeah,
that's a
but
lot of
it went well.
elevation, dude. Like that's a ton. And I think it's important to remember sometimes, like, especially being out here, I feel like we have these big spiry mountains in the West, and it's important to remember that there's just based on where the state is, it's not always a good indicator of what your elevation may be on your race. Where'd I cut out so I can edit that?
Well, we were just talking about how, like, comparing state to state with gain, and a lot of people don't quite understand the East Coast. I mean, we may not have 5 mile uphill climbs, but we have a lot of this.
Hmm. Exactly.
Yeah.
I
So
think it's
that,
always a surprise, like every time people think about Barkley and realize it's in like the middle of nowhere, Tennessee, and you're just like, that is a shitload of gain for the middle of nowhere, Tennessee.
yeah,
Yeah, it's the terrain out there is very different, but still quite wild.
that's true. That's true. Yeah, it's a different kind of thing when you set your mind like, all right, I'm going to climb for 3 miles versus I'm going to climb for a mile, but it's going to be so steep it feels like a wall.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So back to Fierce Dragon. Mhm.
All right. So I did well. I finished, and I was happy with my time, but I felt like it felt more like an adventure than a race. And I felt like I left a little bit on the table. Now, don't get me wrong, the last 20 miles was tough. I was definitely in a world of hurt.
Sure.
But throughout, like before getting to that last 20 miles, there were decisions that I made that erred on the side of comfort. And it was my first 200, so I don't have a lot of, I don't want to say disappointment for myself, but I just wanted to do something different. I wanted to have a 200 miler that felt like a race, which is when I came to you.
Fair. Um, yeah. So which one you did Stone Anvil recently? Why that one? And like how's that one look?
Yeah, I don't know why that one, other than I was volunteering for the race last year, and it's one of my favorite races to volunteer for. My kids love it. We all enjoy being out there. They have not had a female finisher, and they don't have many finishers at all. But I was out there, and I just got this feeling like I think I want to try and do this. And it takes a lot of training. So I asked my youngest, I'm like, what do you think? Like, how do you feel about mommy, trying for another 200 and this one being the one and training for it? And at first he was like, oh, mom, I don't know. And then I think it was Mother's Day rolled around and he wrote me a card and it said, I think you should do that 200.
That's really sweet.
And so that's kind of when I was like, okay, yeah, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this for sure.
Cool.
So I guess it was the support of my 12-year-old.
It does tend to help, right? Like it is usually a multi-person project to do these things, unless you're like single and very few
Yeah,
responsibilities. It is kind of a rough thing to do because there's other people in your life. We need to figure out jobs. We need to figure out family. All this stuff is like it does require some level of support again, unless you're just like single and carefree. So
right. Yeah. I mean,
yeah,
and I pretty much wanted to do it anyway. I'd kind of started thinking about reservations for like the cabin that's out there and, talking to the race director and things like that. But yeah, when he sent me that card, I was full in.
that's awesome. So tell me about the race. Like it's loop course. Where is it? All this stuff. Like what are some of the logistics for it?
So it's in Georgia as well. It is a 20-mile loop, which in my mind is easily broken into two 10-mile loops with a central place. So maybe like a figure eight. Some people describe it as a butterfly, but to me it looks more like a figure eight. And you do the 20 miles 10 times. It is almost exactly 200 miles. So I made sure of that talking to other runners before I signed up. And at first I kind of sheer or kind of like wasn't so interested in the race because it's pretty rocky. The trail
Hmm.
has a lot of rocks and I don't love rocks. Going through Pennsylvania, I absolutely hate it. I always said if I go back into the AT, I'll just skip Pennsylvania because I just really don't enjoy being on rocks. And this course does have some rocks, and that definitely made me a little bit nervous. And it also has one very distinctive climb. It's the climb. I think really the climb is close to a mile and a half, but the real bulk of the climb that people think about is about a mile. It's about 1,000 feet of gain in that 1 mile, so it's real. And I was pretty nervous about it. And so what I really needed to, before I could fully feel good about the race and know what I was doing, is I had to learn the course. So, we can talk about this more in training, but I went out there and I practiced it a lot. And the more that I practiced it, I was able to realize, okay, this is definitely not as hard as Fierce Dragon.
Good.
There's definitely a difference in the amount of climbing. Yes, it is quite rocky, and there are some rooty technical sections, but there are also these sections that were like smooth downhill, not even steep downhill, just like a nice gradual downhill through some like beautiful waterfalls and stream crossings and like canopy of trees, which I really love. I really like being in the canopy of the green tunnel. I feel real comfortable with that as opposed to like wide open spaces. So as I was practicing it, I was like, okay, well, you can actually, this is pretty runnable in a lot of places. Like Fierce Dragon, some of it was runnable, but not much. I mean, most of the time you were like, when it was so hard to run, but this really had some nice runnable sections, which I definitely appreciated.
That's awesome. So like
Oh, and I
course.
guess the other
Right.
important feature of this race, which is similar to Fierce Dragon, is it's in a state park. So there's a cabin that's accessible to you pretty much anywhere on the trail. And it's very accessible, like half of a mile, maybe even a quarter of a mile. Or there's many cabins, but you can rent a cabin from like this one main aid station that I kind of made as my central place. So whenever I wanted to break, as long as it was in 10-mile segments, so like I chose to break every 50 miles. It was just a matter of getting in a car, driving 2 minutes to a cabin, and then I could have a shower, a hot meal, a bed, like anything that I wanted that could keep me too long or
Yeah.
hopefully get me out the door faster.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll get back to that for sure. But I mean, we can talk about it now. But I think that's like one of the logistics of this race that did make certain things a little simpler. And it's not even
Yeah.
the cabin. I mean, the cabin's nice, but the fact that you are um like every 10 miles we have this ability to like replenish or refuel or whatever does make logistics a lot simpler. So
Yeah, I mean, honestly, if you're a new person looking for a 200 miler where you don't have to worry about directions and telling your crew to meet you at a certain time or not having something that you would eventually need, this is the one for you. Because, like you said, every 10 miles, you could have everything at your fingertips.
I mean, I will note that it has like 50,000 feet of gain over 2 miles. So
Yeah,
maybe depends on how good you are at hills. But yeah, that's very fair. The logistics definitely made a lot of the planning a lot simpler, which was
for
great.
sure. Yeah. Well, and I guess the other thing for me, because I practiced it so much, I knew really well how fast I could move on trail. So I was able to tell my crew, give or take a few hours, like where I was going to be, when I was going to be, what mile I was going to be at. So I had a variety of people coming in, and it was easy to coordinate for that reason.
That's awesome. So like how did the race go? I mean, I know it went well, but what, um 82 hours and change, like how did the whole thing go? What was the strategy? Like how'd you move through this? I know it's kind of a newer distance in some ways. Um, so I think everybody has a different experience for what tends to work and what tends to work well. And some of that, like any race, is going to be very individually relevant, um, based on you and sleep needs and all sorts of stuff. So like what worked for you in terms of strategy for this?
I having had the AT experience and knowing what it feels like to go 16, well, 12 to 16 hours a day, resting, getting up another 12 to 16 hours a day. I knew ahead of time that if I rested sooner than later, I was going to pop up and feel good. And so I was going to be able to maintain a quicker pace and, like, say, trying to push 100 miles and then resting. So I created my strategy kind of similar to what I had done on the AT. And it's a comfort level for me. It's what I know works. So I decided every 50 miles I was going to take a break, and I wanted to keep my breaks to 3 hours. And I pretty much stayed on track. I got a little bit ahead of my schedule in the first 50 miles. And so it's always tempting, you get a little bit ahead and you think to yourself, oh, I could rest 4 hours. I'm ahead of
Yep.
schedule. But part of my goals with making this feel like a race and not an adventure was not resting more than 3 hours, even if I got ahead of schedule. And if I happened to be moving a little bit quicker at the cabin and I was up and ready to go, that maybe I left after 2.5 hours. Like, no procrastinating, no enjoying the cabin. This is a race, not an adventure. And so that was like a huge goal of mine because I wanted to finish the race and not have any regrets. I didn't want to think to myself, well, I got to go back and do this again. Like, I was one and done.
Yeah, I figure that might be like, let's find something else. Yeah.
And for me, it worked really well. I don't know how someone else would feel about their race strategy. It was really tempting after my first day because I was moving so quickly. I finished, and I mean, it was just getting dark. And so the pacer that I was with, he's like, Celia, why don't you go 60 miles? Like, why are we stopping? You're plenty fresh. You don't need to stop right now. And I thought to myself, well, if I did 60 miles and then rested, like, overall, I wouldn't be any faster because, like, I wasn't going to go 70 miles to the point where I could cut out a rest. Like, I was still going to probably end up taking three rests. They were still probably going to be 3 hours.
Hmm.
And if I went the full 60 instead of the 50, I ran the risk of not waking up fresh for the next
Hmm.
50. So I really stuck to it. And like I said, it was hard because it had just gotten dark, which meant I rested and it was dark, but I got up knowing that I had a lot of darkness ahead of me.
Yeah.
And it also, and I mean, I kept I gained about 3 hours and I kept that 3 hour lead going into the second night. And I actually stopped to rest when it was still daylight, which meant that when I think I ended up getting up close to 10 for my next, I guess, from miles 100 to 150. And that was definitely like a mind bender. Like,
Yeah.
wow, I'm starting my day at 10 p.m. There's going to be a
It's
lot of darkness.
it's a weird time, especially like I used to work night shifts, as you know, and it's starting your Starting your day post dark is always a very strange thing for the brain.
Yeah. And that's also a little bit of an insight into how I break up the race. Like I never think I'm doing 200 miles. I think I've got 4 50-mile days
Hmm.
ahead of me or 4 50-mile training runs. So literally in my head, I was like, I am starting my day right now. Good morning.
Smart.
It's 10 p.m. Let's go.
So, like for your sleep strategy, I guess one, did you sleep at all? Or do you feel like you slept? I'm sure you did a little bit because the
I,
human brain doesn't do well without it. But like what was your experience on it? And then what did you do to keep that time fairly efficient? And would you do anything differently down the line?
so I because the race is held in the spring and I didn't have a lot of worry about weather and getting ready, I slipped into the cabin, I unloaded my pack, I reloaded it. So that was maybe 5 minutes. Or I had a crew member help me do that. Put some food in the microwave, I jumped in the shower. Okay, that's quite a luxury. By the way, anybody who's doing a 200 miler to know
Yeah.
that you can get a shower, that's amazing. That just makes you a whole new person. So super fast, 5 minute shower, got out, food was hot, ate, and then immediately jumped in bed. And I even, I knew at times that I wasn't eating enough. My goal was to try and get close to 1,000 calories every time I got to the cabin. And I know I wasn't hitting that. I just couldn't get it down. And so every night I had these pancakes that I had pre-made. I would put a pancake in the microwave and I would take it to bed with me and I would lay down and I have these Normatec compression boots. So I would put those on and they would start massaging my legs and they kind of put me to sleep a little bit. And so I'm laying there with like the pancake and I'm trying to eat it and I've got the boots on and I would start to maybe drift off a little bit. So I just placed the warm pancake right on my chest like a heating pad. And I must have dozed some, like maybe 10, 20 minutes, because I would kind of wake up and, the Normatec boots would still be going and my pancake would be a little cooler.
Yeah.
So I'd take a bite or two and then put it back on my chest and try and doze a little bit longer. But to answer your question about timing, I had told my crew or whoever was with me at the cabin or whoever was going to come pick me up, okay, I'm here at, I don't know, 7 o'clock. I'm leaving by 10. So be here by 9:45. And if I'm not up, get me up.
Hmm.
It just so happened I was always up at least 15, 20 minutes before scheduled leave time. I don't know why. I just, I guess your mind knows, or I was anxious or whatever. And so I pretty much always just got up, got dressed, retaped my feet, and was ready to go. I even left 15 minutes early once.
Yeah. Nice.
So
So
I don't know. Maybe I slept. I must have slept because I know time passed that I didn't recognize. But I never slept more than like 40 minutes at
it's
a
tough.
time.
So like did that seem to build over the course of a few days? Like did you seem to get more fatigued or was it just kind of what it was?
I didn't, and I knew that this would be the case because it was kind of the same sleep situation for Fierce Dragon, and even on the AT, there were times where we'd pull into a shelter and we would lay down for like a good 5 or 6 hours, but I would just listen to people snoring around me. So I've gone many days without real sleep, and what I think, maybe there's science to prove me wrong, I'm not sure. But what I think your body, your mind needs a rest. And like the best way to turn off your brain is to sleep. Because you can lay there and your head can spiral with like, should be doing this, I should be doing that. So what about this? What about so what I'm really good at during these races is just turning off my mind. So I may not actually sleep, but I don't lay there and think about anything. And if I start to think about something, I count and I'll just breathe in for 4, out for 6, in for 4, out for 6. So I really just force my brain to rest. And I think that's what makes a difference, at least for me.
Yeah, I think there's some science behind that. I mean, it's new. We don't know a
No.
lot. Like the human brain is one of the most complicated structures in existence, so it's a tough thing to say. But it's like there does seem to be, I mean, there's genetic differences here. Some people need less sleep. There's a whole spectrum on that range. And then there's also like non-sleep deep rest protocols like yoga nidra that do actually seem to provide some level of recharge. We don't quite know why. We know they work, but we're not quite sure why. So yeah, there is something to that. It's just the exact specifics on it. We can't really say, but it does seem
And
to work.
and honestly, even when I was finishing the end of a 50-mile segment, I never felt sleepy. My feet hurt. So like my need to rest was more around getting off my feet, elevating my feet, getting those boots on to like pull blood away from my feet and the rocks. That was like a big deal. And so I was really mostly concerned about what do I need to do so that when I get up, my feet don't hurt. I mean, honestly, I didn't feel sleepy until the very last day. And I would say like the last 20 miles, I could tell it was catching up to me. I will admit that, but the last
Yeah,
day,
that's
it's
fair.
catching up. And then I just poured on the caffeine. I didn't use a lot of caffeine at all throughout the whole race. I used very little, like 40 milligrams here and there when I was first waking up for the cabin. But my Meg, she was there. She paced the last 70 miles with me and she pulled out the Celsius. I've never had a Celsius.
I haven't either, actually. A lot of people drink them at the gym, but I have not had one either.
She pulled out a Celsius and she handed me two caffeine pills and she said, "All right, Celia, it's time."
It's fair. I mean, I actually think that's probably the way to go. I don't know. There's a bunch of theories on caffeine. I will say using it too early in your race is not great. Trying to save it for when you can is a good idea.
Well, and I just didn't need it. I didn't feel like I needed it. Now, there were times where maybe I moved slow and it would have made me happier or perked me up, but I never felt like I was walking and falling asleep.
Yeah, cool. So, like, how was the training for all this? Like, what did it look like? Would you do all this kind of stuff? And granted, I wrote it, so I know that, but share with people, please.
Oh,
I will say, like, precursor, you were the first person I've trained for a 200 miler. Um, and going into it, I was very open with, I have theories, but I don't actually know how this is going to go. I've read and listened to a lot about it. The human body is the human body. So, like, if we can train for, um, train for adaptations. Those adaptations should lead to performance, is kind of the whole theory about training. But again, it was a bit of a gamble, and I appreciate you taking that gamble. So yeah, how did that look? What did it look like? All that stuff.
well, it was fun. And
Great,
it was probably one of like my more fun training blocks. And
great.
I was talking with a friend recently and I was saying, whether it was the best training cycle or not is irrelevant to me because I'm not getting paid to do this. Like I do this because I enjoy it. And it worked out amazingly because I ran faster than I wanted to. So obviously it was a good training block. But at the end of the day, I had a lot of fun. And that's really what I was looking for. And I do very much appreciate that. Um, the specifics of it, let's see. I don't know. I think the you're the coach,
I mean, I know it from my end. It's
the
more
bread
about
and
from
butter.
your end.
All right,
Yeah.
from my perspective, okay, I think the biggest things that made the biggest difference were my long weekends. So I have a schedule where I have my kids a week and then I don't have my kids a week. So I have a full week, including Friday, Saturday, Sunday, if I want, where I can literally go to a trail and put in 25 hours of running if I want to, or however many crazy hours I want. And we built up to that. If I remember correctly, I think my first long weekend was probably 50 miles, 40 miles, 50 miles in 3 days. I don't remember. But, we
Close.
built up.
Yeah.
A lot of it was hiking to start with. And then I slowly started running more and hiking less. So I was building up miles and intensity at the same time, from my perspective. And quickly I moved from just, doing big weekends like on the AT in various places to going specifically to the race course. And I spent 3 weekends on the race course. And I think those weekends went 60 miles, 70 miles, 80 miles in 3 days. And I was moving at a pace that was definitely quicker than my goal race pace. So I felt like the training, in addition to the big miles, I was also getting some good intensity training, which hopefully would make race day feel easier. And I would say that that was true. And I was also getting practice at being at a very similar cabin that I was going to be at in the race, showering, getting up and going every single day or, 3 days in a row, and like all those little logistics, figuring out what shoes I needed to wear on the course, figuring out how the rocks were going to be, things like that. So I think that was pretty huge. I know a lot of other people doing a 200 probably aren't going to have access to the
Yeah.
race course like I did. It was a huge advantage for me. But in general, I think the big weekends are helpful.
Yeah.
I don't know if they're helpful every single week. I don't really know how your body could recover well from that. But for me, because I had this forced every other week schedule with my kids, it seemed to be pretty beneficial because I was definitely tired after the big weeks, but by the next time around, so skipping a weekend and then going into the next weekend afterwards with that weekend break, I was excited and I was ready and I wanted to do it again and I was still having fun. I think as long as you're still having fun, it's kind of a pretty good indicator that you're recovering pretty well. So that was huge.
I agree.
The second thing that was really big was the bike, and that was very new for me for my training. I had never really cross trained in a running training block as much as we did, and it was out of necessity. I have shin splints that make it so I can't run on road, and they really kind of make it so that even running on flat trail can be painful at times. So unless I'm on a mountain trail that involves a lot of hiking and a easy downhill running, it's probably going to hurt, especially after, an 80-mile 3-day weekend.
Yeah.
So we did a lot of biking. I think it was 3 days a week, anywhere from, it was probably, I got up to about an hour each time, I think. So about 3 hours a week of biking plus the strength training. It meant that my overall hours of training was much higher than I had done in the past. But because it wasn't all running, it was biking, I was still recovering while I had this vision in my head as I was biking that I was putting little blocks of a house, my aerobic house, together. So every bike ride was like, I don't know, 4 or 5 blocks that built this base, that was making me super strong. And then I'd go out on the trails and I'd, put in the walls and I don't know, then do some strength training so I get a little bit of electrical lighting, building like this huge 200-mile house.
I enjoy this vision. I mean, it's kind of the right idea. Yeah, a lot.
And without that biking, I feel like the base might have just like fallen to pieces because I couldn't build that base on the road like most runners I think can, with their recovery runs and their easy runs. Like I never did a recovery run. I didn't do an easy run. My shins couldn't handle it. All of that was done on the bike.
Yeah.
It was big for
I mean, I
me.
think some of it, like, I plan this year is definitely to work on the shin splint issue, but when it is going to be hard for anybody struggling with some kind of chronic injury to fully repair that while you're also trying to scale towards some asinine distance that we probably shouldn't do, right? So, like, if we're gonna do those two things at the same time, it's going to be really difficult, especially if you care about performance. So, the bike was great.
Yeah.
And the fact that your shins didn't hurt on the trails means we could still get a lot of training volume in that was really relevant without making that worse. We like kept the injury at a very stagnant,
Yeah.
unpleasant, but stagnant level, and then while still being able to build fitness. So it was good.
And on race day, I didn't have a single achy shin at all. So that's where it matters.
Awesome.
Get your athlete to toe the line uninjured is the biggest thing.
It's a tough line. Like we do dumb things for fun. So yeah, it's a hard line to toe, but it's real. And yeah, you mentioned you're on like a 14-day training cycle, which does allow you to build some level of intensity and volume at the same time, with a lot more recovery on each because you're like recovering one energy system while you're training the other. And it is a privilege of your schedule that that was really feasible, right? And I think
Yeah,
that's a tough thing for a lot of people. We can apply that principle across the board for a lot of people, where like big, and we're seeing this more in certain marathon training, depending on the coach, but big training weekend. So like big long run 1 week where we were more focused on volume and then like more intensity the next week, kind of stagger back and forth. And intensity is blanket term that covers a lot of shit. In here, it was more like lactate processing and these like
mhm.
higher, longer distance, like mid-level intensity stuff.
Yeah,
If anybody's like listening to this for actual training advice, is kind of that realm of things. But it did result in basically 4 days of running a week in order to build to a 200 miler, which I
Kind of crazy.
believe you thought was weird. And I also think it's kind of weird, but it seemed to work. So
Seemed
there's
to
a lot
work.
of ways
Yeah.
to make things happen.
Yeah, so you mentioned like the intensity. So the speed work was also kind of a new component. Adding, so every Wednesday we had a speed work session, and like a lot of it's kind of easy to sit and think, well, I'm doing a 200 miler. I don't really need that. But when I look back on my data, on my race data, when I was coming up that intense climb with 1,000 feet of gain in a mile, my heart rate got up to pretty much the same level we were doing speed work at. So I'm sure my body was like, oh, yeah, I've been here. This will be fine. I guess we'll do this again 10 times in this race
Yeah.
and I'll
I
be okay.
I mean, it is real. I feel like we think about running in scare quotes, these 200 milers and or even 100 milers and think that like you're going to be spending almost all your time at an endurance pace. And I mean, yeah, that'll be the bulk of it, but you're also going to spend a good amount of time in this like mid lactate threshold space. Like it's not all going to be zone two. So training as if you're going to be doing nothing but zone two. I mean, one, I find it really fucking tedious and boring, if I'm be super blunt, and it drives me crazy, but that's just because I'm me. But further, it's also just not completely race applicable.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree. And I think that actually, I mean, I wasn't too stressed about it as I was climbing. And then even when I looked back on the data, I shared it with you. I think I spent maybe 5.5 hours of my first day in zone three or higher.
Yeah, and be fair, it
And
like wasn't cranked at threshold for anybody looking at
no,
it. It wasn't like that borderline of zone three, zone four, but it surely wasn't zone two either.
it was not
Yeah.
zone two. And actually, when I look back on the other days, I have a tendency, my heart rate drops. My intensity can stay the same, but my heart rate will drop as I fatigue. But even with my heart rate dropping, I still, up to the very last day, had time in zone three.
Yeah. That's pretty common is that like you see an increase of fat metabolism over time. So like that's pretty normal. But yeah, you're still gonna probably push it higher. You're still gonna see that disparity. So that's
Yeah.
fair. So like question I had for you, you had a great crew. Um, just delightful, very on point, very well run. Um, I realize there's a large amount of experience on there, but
Yeah.
what can people do logistically from a cruise perspective, pacing perspective, all of these things? And again, I realize it's a figure eight, so there's a lot of access, but at most of these races, there's some level of access for crew. Like, how can crews be run well so that you can get a lot of like use out of them so they can support you the best they can?
I think the biggest thing comes to the runner, to be honest with you. So it's important as a runner that you pick out a crew that know you. I mean, there's some obvious things and they have some experience, but what really helps, I put together a spreadsheet for my crew and I had my estimated time that I was going to get there. And I had exactly what, like little reminders that I would need at that point. So if I was coming in and it was 7 p.m., there would be a reminder on this spreadsheet that said, ask me if I need a headlamp. Like little things
Love
because
that.
they're just not going to they're not going to know what you need, and in the moment it's going to be very rushed. So I think to myself, I'm as fast as I'm organized for my crew. So if I pull into an aid station and I haven't organized my food, my hydration, my gear, and put little notes for them, they're going to say, well, what do you need? Because they don't know. I mean, maybe they can guess, but I've just spent 10 miles or 8 miles or however many miles before getting to this aid station thinking about what I need. Or maybe I thought about it ahead of time because I practiced and I made a little note on the spreadsheet. So, a lot of times I'd pull in and I'd say, well, I need this, this, and this. And so I could kind of like tell them, but then they're overwhelmed with like, okay, she wants to get out of here quickly. And she just gave me a list of 5 things. But hey, I noticed on the spreadsheet, she'd already mentioned these. So these are already sitting out waiting for her. So when I pulled in, my crew had my water bottles ready. They had my food packets set out. So I could just be fitting all that into my packet while they were getting whatever miscellaneous extra stuff I had thought about on trail. So I don't know if I'm fully answering your question, but I think it really comes back to the runner and you need to be organized. You need to help your crew. I mean, they want to help you and they want to do everything that they can, but they can't read your mind.
Yeah, I mean,
And
that is really the question and super helpful.
yeah,
Because I think a lot of the time we go into these races with, so there's a reckless abandon amongst pretty much all ultra runners, which I like both relate to as someone on some level of neurospicy spectrum with some level of ADHD and just a lack of organization and all. Like there's a chaos to this sport that draws me and others to it. That said, if we really do care about performance, there has to be some level of like
yeah,
structured, boring work that we probably have to put in if we're going to do our best. So it's really helpful to hear that like a lot of it does come down to this like, well, maybe we do need to look at a spreadsheet and figure out what your times might be and figure out what the mileage might be and make sure we're fueling and all of these things that most of us don't really like to do, but don't actually take that long if we just like
no,
take a few minutes.
yeah. The one thing I personally really like in my career is definitely starting to, I mean, the more that they work with me, I like to have my bottles pre-made and I like them to just hand me my bottles, put them in my pack, and then I'll have a little baggie of food. I want them just to hand me my baggie. And maybe I don't want what's in there, but it's there. I'll grab it and I'll be like, oh, I don't really want that. Let me get a few other things. But I just like knowing that if I'm feeling good and I'm willing, I'm just going to be at that aid station less than a minute because it's going to be like, NASCAR pit stop.
Yeah,
Get in,
exactly.
hand me, and I'm going to go.
Oh, I think it's real, and it's real in all races. Like, um, one of Carl Meltzer's big things is like he spends, God, some stupidly short amount of time in aid stations in a 100 miler. I mean, and he fuels well on nothing but gels and like has his shit together. He's also fast as shit. He's just really fast. So like that helps. But it's like the more it can be a NASCAR pit stop where if you can take the entire car apart and put it back together in a minute, your race will be faster. That's it.
Yeah.
All right, before tech snafu number two, we're basically talking about how your crew can just function like a pit car or pit crew. But I was also saying or about to say that I appreciate their like level of attention to detail. There's this like constant communicative text thread, which is someone who is somewhat neurotic. I very much appreciated because, I'm 3,000, 2,000 miles away. It helps to know that things are going fairly well. So, yeah, your crew was just great. So much appreciated on their part.
They were incredible. The only and it wasn't even a snafu, it was, because I was ahead of schedule. People were they couldn't get to me because they had work responsibilities. So I ended up doing just some miles alone, which ended up being good. Like another aspect of this ultra running for me is to be more independent and conquer like scary things such as being on trail alone at night, which if you always have a pacer with you, you don't ever conquer that. So at one point, Meg was flying in from Baltimore and she was not going to make it on time because I was still ahead of schedule. So I got 10-mile section by myself in the dark. And I didn't even realize that I was doing something that was scary for me until I was a good 5 miles in. I'm like, oh, I'm doing it.
That's great.
Amazing.
Love that. So, with the Pacers, like you had a Pacer for a large chunk of this race. Would you change that? Would you keep it? Like how can someone help like structure some of that pacing? And yeah,
I think I would change it. I mean, I'm very grateful for it and I loved it and I really, really appreciated it. But that 10-mile section that I ended up doing by myself, I kind of needed. I needed the break. You put a certain amount of energy into, well, you don't want to be a drag for your pacers. You want to be kind of upbeat and happy. And I certainly wasn't all the time, but it was something that I
yeah,
wanted to be. So just having that 10 miles, and I was deep, like maybe 130 miles in. I can't quite remember, but I was past the 100-mile mark.
sounds about right.
And I was just able to be like, I'm just gonna be whatever. Maybe it's an ugly Celia, maybe it's a great Celia, maybe it's a silly Celia. Like it doesn't matter what it is. I'm just gonna be right now for these 10 miles. And then I was pretty glad when Meg came and I had her company. So I think I mean, everybody's going to be different. This race was kind of special. Usually for a 200-mile race, you're not allowed to have a pacer at mile 40. And I was. And so I did. And I mean, I think most people aren't going to be able to have one until at least maybe 70 or 80. I'm not sure what
Sounds
the
about
rules are
right.
for other races. So the story might be different if you go alone for, 80 miles. You may want someone for the remaining 120. But I will say 160 miles was maybe um, well, it's hard to say because it's what I had,
Yeah,
I mean, maybe if
that's
I had,
tough.
I would say something differently. But that was like a big thing from my last 200 miler. I hooked up with another racer and we pretty much stayed together the whole time. And it was a great experience. I learned a lot from him. He was much more experienced than I was, and I was probably more successful because of it. But I also made compromises. I stayed at the cabin a little bit longer at times, like paces. Well, there were compromises so that we could stay together. And that part of this race was not doing that and, running my own race. Of course, with a pacer, they're not, you know, you're still running your own race, but there is always a little bit of an element of you're different when you're with somebody, and it's an energy change
It's
for
fair.
sure.
I think some of that's like, yeah, some of it's gonna be dictated by course, right? So if we're looking at something like Moab pops to mind, because it's right, it's 3 hours from me. And like that course, you're 20 plus miles a lot of the time between aid stations. So like you have to, if you don't want a pacer between two aid stations, like you have to know that you're ready to go a marathon. It's not there
Yeah.
isn't a lot of like, oh, I made a mistake. Yeah, there isn't a lot of adjustment space there. Whereas some of these other ones have one every like 10 to 15. So that's an
Yeah.
easier choice and like to give yourself a break. And then also
It's
knowing yourself. Like I tend to run alone because it's kind of my space to process what I find to be the difficulties of the world. Um, Whereas a lot of people tend to run mostly with run clubs. So just kind of knowing what you want to get out of this sport, I think is a really important thing.
Yeah, and I do really want to stress that I mean I had the best pacers in the world. I mean the absolute people that I love being around, and that that makes a big difference. Really. I mean, I say that like the energy was different. It's all on me. Like the people that I was with, they would have accepted me if I would have been like a monster. Like they are really incredible people that were with me, and like the people that I adore more than anything. So, you know, that makes it awesome. I definitely enjoyed every minute with them. Just that I did notice that 10 miles that I ended up doing alone, it was a good thing that happened when it happened.
Fair. So, a couple more things if we have time. One would be fueling. Like, how did fueling go for this? Because I know it's tough. Like any of these races, it gets tough, and the longer it is, the tougher it is. So, how did that go for you?
Um, as you predicted, and not as I hoped, but fine.
Okay.
The first 50 miles, I ate my bars, I did fine. And then after that, I just was not interested in chewing, even though I had hoped that that would not be the case. And in all of my planning and my little packets that my crew was going to give to me, there were chewable items. And it just pretty much got to the point where I was like, nope, nope, nope.
Yeah.
So, and that's what you predicted. So,
It was a guess. It was an educated guess of just,
very
I don't want to
yeah,
have this shit anymore. Like you've been eating it for 2 days. So, yeah.
pretty much done. Um, so yeah, I guess like I ate the bars and I drank my scratch and I stayed on top of my calories really well in the first 50 miles, and then it slipped a little, but it still kept up. I think at least 50 grams, I would say, of carbs an hour. I think when I really think about it, I think I managed to hit that target between the scratch and then I was eating a lot of gummy bears and
Great.
gummy bears saved me. I didn't know that I liked gummy bears, but for whatever reason, I could get those down, no problem.
They're kind of a weirdly magic fuel. You're not the first person to tell me this. I have some people in the strength community that like fuel an entire strongman meet on nothing but gummy bears. It's like they
They're
work
really,
strangely well.
and I wasn't going to buy them, but I was at Costco with my 12-year-old. please buy me these. And I was like, oh, they're so bad for you. He's like, Mom, please. I'm like, all right. And then I was looking at them in the pantry and I thought, there's 18 grams of carbs per pack.
I love that you had a Costco amount of gummy bears.
Yeah, yeah, it was a lot.
Oh, that's delightful. I love that.
I did that. And, the awesome sauce, spring energy, and Huma gels. I ended up doing quite a bit. So I'm gluten free. I'm celiac, so that's like always a struggle for me. But last minute, my older son bought me some gluten free bread, which I'm so grateful for because I think I ate close to 3 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches.
Awesome.
The crew would make me, and I would take on the road, and some grilled cheese sandwiches. So I did get some, more regular food. What ended up happening towards the end, which I truly I would like to figure out how to avoid, but I don't know how to avoid. Is I would every 10 miles I'd get to an aid station, I'd sit down and I would just eat because I was getting so hungry, and being on trail with just like the gels and the gummies, it just my stomach was so hungry. It was growling. It was uncomfortable. So I would sit at the aid station and I would like eat a cup of noodles, or I would eat a grilled cheese sandwich, or like whatever was hot and not sweet.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. There's some palate fatigue. There is like, and this is why it's tough. Like we know that carbs are the like fuel source here, but when we're going multiple days in a row, you can't just have anything, nothing but sugar. Like, yeah, they're the thing, they're the important thing from a performance perspective, but it's like there's
Yeah.
other things that matter, right? Because you are constantly breaking down the body. We need some protein, your stomach, we need some fat, and then also just like
Oh, so the
some
protein.
breakdown. Yeah.
I think I really nailed the protein. I did the Tailwind recovery drink,
Mm,
and the
right.
original was to do one serving of that, which has about 10 grams of protein every 10 miles. But I quickly realized that drinking those calories was going a lot better than trying to eat bars. And so at the second aid station that I passed, so I was passing 2 aid stations every 10 miles, I would just had some balloons. I don't know. Did you see that?
I did
My
see
wife,
that. Zoom has these like reactions if you do
oh,
finger things, and you did this like peace thing. Mine are turned off, which is mine. Mine doesn't do that. But yeah, Zoom's really weird. It'll also do thumbs up and it'll make a heart if you do this symbol. So yeah, it's very strange.
okay. So twice every 10 miles, I would do a tailwind recovery mix. And towards the end of the race, I had this special drink, which would be 1 scoop of tailwind instead of two, because it started to get nauseous from
Sure.
it, plus Coke. And so I'd sit down at the aid station. I'd be
Oh,
like,
man.
make me my drink, please.
I cannot imagine that combination, but whatever works, whatever,
Yeah,
whatever gets the job done.
Coke, 6 ounces of water, 1 scoop of tailwind.
And, and then,
Chop.
yeah, I mean, the fueling's tough. You did a really good job. Like you stayed ahead of it and you didn't fall in a hole. So it's good.
I think
And
because of Meg, who was quite amazing, turned on some music for me in the last 20 miles, and I was just chasing the music. I ran my last 10 miles just as fast as my first, and that's pretty incredible.
that's great.
Yeah.
It's really good. And the last question I have for you before we close out is you had a fall somewhat early on. Um, how how'd that happen? What happened? And like what did that feel like?
So throughout training, I had this issue with my knee, and it stems from my new dog who pulled me on a run, and I twisted my knee. And then I think 3 or 4 weeks later, we were on a dog walk, and she pulled me again, and I fell and retwisted my knee. So this was like a struggle that we faced in training, which
Hmm.
resulted in extra biking the weeks after my fall. But fortunately, it was really only about a week healing time each fall. But I think bit on the edge, a little bit loose. And there's a 3 mile section at the start of the 20-mile loop that is very technical. And there's a lot of drop downs because of roots and trees and rocks. And I took a big step down, and I've got short little legs. I'm all of 5'2" here, and that big step down was just I met it with a kind of a funny step, and I twisted it again. Rolled, landed on my back, and I laid there for a second. And I was at mile 60 or so. And I thought and I was alone because my pacer, I was ahead of schedule. So she was about 3 miles late. So I was alone during this section, and it was dark. And I had a moment where like I was by myself, little self-pity party, and I thought, is this my excuse? Is this my out? Am I done? Am I hiking? Am I hiking? Am I calling it quits? Like, what am I going to do? So I sat there for a minute and I kind of held my knee, had a little pity party. And then I got up and I was like, I'll just hike, see how it feels. And it, for whatever reason, it didn't hurt. It felt fine. And I'm hiking along and I thought, well, you could just finish. You got 103 hours. You're way ahead of schedule. You could just hike the whole thing and you'd be fine. And I thought, oh boy, but then you'd have to come back and do this again. And we don't want that. So I proud of myself. I pulled myself out of the pity party and decided that, game on. I'm still racing.
Good. I mean, I think there's usually going to be that choice at some point
Yeah.
in these long races because the finish times are very doable in many ways, right?
Yeah.
Like
Oh
it
yeah.
is usually really simple, not
Mm-hmm.
easy. Like kind of definitionally simple, but not easy to finish most of these really long distances if we go through a decent training block. Um, but
And you during the race.
pardon?
And you make smart decisions during the race.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Well, like even like at most 100 finishing times, it's like a 19 and change minute mile, and it's just not as long as you're relentless and you don't need that much sleep, like you'll be fine. Um, but there's usually going to be some kind of choice of, well, are we done now? And I'm really glad you didn't make that choice. I think that's great.
Well, I mean, you get this side of your brain that's like, this is dumb. You don't have to do this. And not
100%.
have to do it, but now you have a real excuse. You can tell everybody you fell, you hurt your knee, nobody would question, people would support you. You got a reason. Like, why?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's a very real thing. I told you like that I went through that too because I twisted my ankle like halfway through the race I ran. It's like there's a very real reason that you can call it, and then you just don't. You just keep going anyway. It's fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that's pretty much all I have for you. What's next? What else would you like to share? Thanks for
Uh,
coming.
well, I don't know. Well, what's next? So you're going to help me figure out my shins. That's the
Yeah,
big,
I mean, I think we're on a good track here. Your hamstrings are proportionally not strong compared to the rest of your lower legs, so I think if we can get that rolling, that'll help a lot.
yeah. So that's the biggest thing on my plate. Of course, I want to finish the AT, and I'm signed up for a race in December. I mean, I don't. I'm not a big racer. I don't race a lot. That's not my personality. I prefer the training over the race. So I have some adventures that I hope to do throughout the summer. Maybe some backpacking with the kids, and then I kind of hope to recreate a similar scenario that we did for this past training block where I have a December race and then something in the spring because it was just too much fun.
Right. I think it'll be good. Yeah. I mean, you killed it. You did really well at a like two. I realize loop course makes logistics easier, but at a 200-mile, 50,000 feet of gain in 82 hours, like that is an incredible finishing time. Like it was really good race. So yeah, I'm glad it went so well.
Well, I happen to have a good coach.
You're very sweet. I'm bad at these things. Thank you. Well, friend, thank you very much. Hang out for a second. Everybody else, thanks for listening, and we'll be back soon with another one. Thank you again for listening to the Trail and Ultra Running Training Podcast. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. Just a reminder, nothing you hear on this podcast is medical advice, and you should always speak with a medical professional before making changes to your training or your nutrition. If you enjoyed the podcast or found it helpful, please leave a rating or review. It tells the algorithm robots that people like it, and that means more people will hear it. Or even better, just share it with someone who you think would benefit. If you prefer a video version, head to the Trail and Ultra Running Training Group on Facebook or check out the Mountain Goat Endurance Coaching YouTube channel. Thank you again, and I hope you have a great next run.